I hoped Septimont would prove WuWa's storytelling quality, but it wasn't quite what I had expected. Rinascita's quests have been a massive step up compared to everything that came before. Cartethyia story in particular swept me away with its simple, heartfelt tale told with far more skill than I'd ever have expected. I was finally excited to see where Kuro would take things in the future. Would they continue their steady improvement? Could they get it right in a quest with a less intimate focus? And would they take the opportunity to show Cartethyia continuing to grow as a person? In many ways, Septimont did live up to those high expectations, but there was still something missing. And if the discussions I've seen about the quest are anything to go by, I'm not the only one who enjoyed the journey but ended up slightly confused about the details. Let's start with the things which worked really well. Full spoilers ahead. Much like the previous quest, they did a great job with providing multi-layered story hooks. The first was Cartethyia's disappearance. Following on from where her story left off, it's natural for her to go out into the world in search of challenges to overcome. Her newfound goal is to become even stronger than the rover, and the only way to reach that goal is to seek out new tests and new things to learn. And once she went missing, of course we would want to go and help her out. The moment we arrived in Septimont, we got sucked into the more immediate series of events involving Lupa. Her drive to win the Aegon tournament, to expose the match-fixing scandal, to navigate the politics, and find a path which lets her be true to her inner self. And besides the immediate plot, there was much more going on. Booling, with her hints that something was not quite right, the flashes of Cartethyia's perspective, which seed so far from our experience, and the more mundane things like learning about Septimont's culture, their history, and how their famed gladiators were treated like modern-day celebrities. Lupa's introduction did feel a little awkward to me, which we'll get to later on, but overall I was engaged and interested right from the start, and the further we went, the more interesting it became. The surface level presentation of the story was perhaps even better than that previous quest. The dialogue was mostly sharp and to the point, the cinematography was gorgeous, the action scenes were top notch, and the story moved along at a breakneck pace. Perhaps a little too fast at times, but on balance, that's probably better than the alternative. The English voice acting was, again, absolutely fantastic. I love the mix of accents we get. It brings so much more variety and lets each character stand out and feel more real than they would if they all had a generic accent. Lupa's was great, but the highlight for me has to be Booling. Her Eastern-sounding accent was a fantastic little touch, and she instantly became a truly memorable favourite. I'm also happy with the way they split the story into two parts with a few weeks in between. It can be frustrating to wait when you're excited to continue, but that extra time provides space for us to speculate, to theorize, to build up anticipation. Plus, it means that the wait for the next part of the story is much shorter. Given the choice between one longer quest every 6 weeks and two more tightly focused ones every 3 weeks, I definitely choose the latter. And the city of Septimont itself was fantastic. Its sense of scale fits its reputation, the streets felt vibrant and alive, and there were tons of fantastic little details everywhere. I particularly like that many of the enemies in this region summon echoes of their own, which makes that part of the combat mechanics feel much more solidly grounded in the world. After all, if we can summon an echo to fight beside us, why couldn't anyone else? All of these facets came together so well, and once again, Kuro proved that they can get the delivery of their story right. But the thing which stood out to me the most throughout this patch was the character growth and how much it echoed the central themes of the story and the region as a whole. The highlight was, of course, Lupa. At the start, we see her outward persona. She's a quintessential gladiator, bubbling with enthusiasm, energy, strength, and just a dash of arrogance. Septimonians seem to value loyalty, disdain weakness, and worship strength above all else. And as a celebrated warrior, Lupa embodies their ideals. But she's aware that the gladiator competition is rigged, and match-fixing is rife, and the noble family which sponsored her is at the center of it. This could have been her conflict, with her torn between loyalty to her family and her sense of right and wrong, but instead her moral compass never wavers, and she is prepared to sacrifice everything in the pursuit of her ideals. She comes across as such a strong and heartfelt person as a result. Instead, her journey has much greater depth as she begins to question those ideals which her entire nation holds central to their worldview. She sees the pain in the eyes of those who fail to win, and begins to question, what would she have done if she hadn't been blessed with such skill? Could she have fulfilled her dreams without dirtying her hands? Should she really judge those who break the rules just to survive, or was she blinded by her own arrogance? She looks at those around her, Mia's story of pure determination despite her lesser skill, Cartethyia's bravery when stepping into the unknown, Rover's respect for the weak and willingness to trust those less powerful than them, and begins to see that her focus on her goal led her to underestimate so many others and even underestimate herself. I absolutely loved the direction they took here. It explored the dark side of Septimonian culture itself, brought up different perspectives and exposed their flaws, and showed Lupa growing as a person without ever losing her core essence. I especially loved that all of this is separate from the rover. We played an important part, but Lupa herself was the true driving force behind the story, and by the end she feels like the same person, but with her strength tempered with a newfound depth of understanding. The one slightly jarring note was her scene after the end of the story. I know that some will have loved it, but for me it felt a little out of character and it didn't quite fit with the growth we saw throughout the quest. But aside from that, her story was fantastic. I was also very happy to see Cartethyia taking the next step in her hero's journey as well, as she fought her way through a much darker timeline in the hopes to turn the path of fate towards something better. This is exactly the kind of thing she said she wanted at the end of her previous quest, and it's very satisfying to see that wish fulfilled. And her after story was perfect. I loved that it was her just living her life and reflecting on her journey so far. The moment where she talks about her adoptive parents was bittersweet, as she holds back from reaching out because it would only bring them pain. She feels much more independent and like an actual person with her own inner life and hopes and fears. It would have been easy for Kuro to just say that Carti is traveling the world and doing this kind of thing off screen. I hope they continue to let us see her growth for ourselves instead, so that she can be a common thread across the larger arc of Rover's story. One of the biggest flaws of gacha storytelling is the tendency to leave people behind. It seems that with Cartethyia at least, Kuro might have decided to buck that trend and give us something better. Another thing which I see as a positive is how ambitious the story was. Cartethyia's quest had a fairly simple plot, which left me curious about how they would handle something with a wider scope, and it looks like we have our answer. Where that one was a simple narrative, defined by a slow reveal of the fairly linear history behind a single character, this one had several parallel narratives between which we skipped back and forth, and one of the most interesting hooks which kept me going was the desire to see how those different story threads would fit together in the end. I love non-linear storytelling. Memento, Recursion, Predestination, The Prestige, The First 15 Lives of Harry August, This Is How You Lose the Time War. I could go on and on. It goes without saying that these stories are difficult to tell. Just like anything else, their immediate plot needs to be told in an engaging way which hooks people and keeps them interested, but they also need to navigate the fact that the structure of their narrative is fundamentally different to the way we experience the world. Those extra convolutions risk breaking our immersion, and these stories have to do extra work to keep the story flowing and then pull it all together in a way which not only fulfills the promises which had been set up, but also resolves the narrative structure in a way which helps it click together. But while I appreciate the ambition they showed, unfortunately I don't think they quite stuck the landing there. When I finished the quest, I was very happy and satisfied and felt like I had understood it. Cristoforo had set up a Sonoro sphere, forcing Septimont to repeat the Aegon over and over. He used Mia's memory to override Lupa's, to nudge the story towards a world from which the Thronodian could slowly draw power until eventually it could become reality once more. Before he could complete his loop, Cartethyia entered the sphere, and through her strength she was able to change the flow of time and set Lupa on a different path for future iterations, which could maybe lead to freedom. Then the rover arrived, helped Lupa take that next step, and she broke the cycle once and for all. Cristoforo didn't get what he wanted. Lupa played the part of the hero, and Cartethyia was the catalyst which made this fix possible. Also, I guess Booling stumbled into the sphere at some point too and just chilled out and enjoyed the sights. Either that, or she was somehow aware of the situation even when trapped inside. Most of the narrative's complexity seemed surprisingly easy to follow, and the addition of the timeline view at the end made everything crystal clear in terms of how the threads we saw all fit together. But the moment I looked back at the story, I realized that much of it just didn't quite fit together on a deeper level, and so much of it was just left for us to make assumptions. I don't quite understand how Julia conspiring with Cristoforo fits in with the whole time loop path, for example. Was she in the loop herself? Did Cristoforo interact with her in every cycle to nudge events along his desired direction? Or was she outside of events as well, an active participant in his machinations? I assume that all of Septimont was captured by the sphere. I think that all the people we met and talked to in there were real people who lived in Septimont, and they were all stuck in the loop and are now free. Otherwise, Augusta and Juno would be a really weird situation, though I'd be curious to know what happened from their perspective. I guess they all have no memory of anything beyond that final iteration, so I have no clue how they'd reconcile any lost time or whether they'd noticed it at all. I have no idea what would have happened to anyone who died in any iteration, or how those warping timelines really functioned, whether they existed in parallel or in sequence, or why Cartethyia had to stay behind in her section of the loop. These are the kinds of details which those other stories clarify along the way, so that everything makes sense by the time the narrative is resolved, and it helps make the experience as a whole feel more cohesive. And I'm not alone in feeling a little confused about these points. I've seen a bunch of discussions where people are debating these details, and the lack of clarity obviously masks their appreciation of the story in retrospect. And I also doubt that this was a deliberate attempt at bewildering complexity akin to Primer. It works well even without the answers to these deeper questions, and I'm very happy to see them keep up the standards of their storytelling while tackling a much more complex tale, but I do find myself wishing that we could have had a clearer understanding of it all at the end. I'll just have to hope that we'll get those answers later on. Another thing which felt like a bit of a letdown was that only one of the characters we met in Raguna made their way to Septimont with us. We got some great continuity with Cartethyia taking such a major role, but I'd have really hoped to see how the events of the previous quest affected the others from that region. Obviously gotchas are gonna gotcha and forever move on to the next new thing, but one of the best ways to make people fall in love with a new character is to give them interactions with older characters people already love. Imagine how cool it would have been if some of the others had come with us and fought alongside Lupa too. An interesting pairing would have been Carlotta and Cantarella. Raguna's nobles do visit Septimont after all. Those two could have started off with a frosty distance between them due to their family's shared history, but Lupa's endless warmth coupled with the fires of competition could have slowly thawed their reserve and led them towards a newfound friendship. Or Phoebe could have been interesting too, as we could see her confront the contradictions of her faith, or at least how she would react when presented with such a different way of life in a region so close to home. Or even Chacona, who could have tagged along to spread her music from the sidelines. Her and Lupa would have been an entertaining pair together. Some of them even showed up in Septimont at the end of the TCG, which to me just highlighted the fact that they could have tagged along for the main story too, and that even with those cameos we still don't have any answers. I'm left wondering at how the changes in the world affected the people we already met. It's sad to think that we might never know, and it's sad to feel like these people don't exist when the spotlight of the story turns away. The pacing of the quest was very good for the most part, and on the whole I have very few complaints. However, there were a few places where the story strength was sacrificed in favour of keeping things moving quickly. While this might feel a little nitpicky to some, personally I find it really interesting to highlight these minor flaws and think about ways the story could have been improved. This was most notable for me in two specific places in the first half of the story, and there were a couple of ways they could have fixed these issues, one of which is particularly interesting. First, Lupa latched onto Rover very quickly. Apparently a single parry was not only enough for her to be certain that the rover is an unparalleled warrior, but it also convinced her to grant them her implicit trust and to partner with them in the most important gladiatorial competition of her entire life. I feel like the intent here was to show us that Lupa is impulsive and enthusiastic, traits which were well evident throughout the rest of the story. But for me, it felt a little too fast to be believable, and it would have worked better if they had changed it just a little. For example, she could have been excited to test Rover's strength after their first encounter, which would have led her to invite them to try out in that first battle. And then, after fighting together, it would have made so much more sense for her to want to team up. This tweak would have kept the quest length pretty much exactly the same, but the introduction would have felt a lot more natural to me. That bumpy start was only a minor gripe, and everything clicked into place pretty smoothly afterwards, but I still wish they had handled it a little better. And second, when Lupa raised accusations at her former family in front of the entire city, it took mere minutes for her accusation to be heard, confirmed via a magical word of Priestess Yuno, and for the entire corrupt noble house to go from the height of their power to completely dismantled and disgraced. Given the setup, I was expecting Lupa's integrity to be cast into doubt, and for this to take more time, but instead, this entire subplot was resolved in no time at all. I suspect this is, again, because they wanted to keep the pacing up and keep it simple and obvious what was happening. In a different place, this sequence of events could have been depicted in detail to let us explore the legal systems of this new nation, but that would not have fit the theme of Septimont at all, so I don't think it would have been worthwhile. But even in the decisive, martial culture, I'd have expected such a thing to take time, especially when it came to carrying out the sentence. I think we'd all have got the point if they had just arrested Julia on her own and announced that a trial would be held. We could have had some dialogue later which mentioned the full fallout without it bloating the length of the quest. Those solutions would have made the story feel more cohesive without changing much. However, I think there was an even better way to go about it, which would have changed even less. Explicitly make those quirks a part of the story. The literary term is to hang a lantern on it. When writers add foreshadowing to their stories, they can run into a problem. If the things they add feel too out of place, it can make the reader lose immersion. Even if they keep reading and reach the point where the foreshadowing is paid off, and they finally understand that the writer meant for those things to feel out of place until they were explained later on, the reader's experience up until that point was still less effective than it could have been. To hang a lantern in this context means that the story itself should acknowledge the inconsistency. For example, by having Rover think that it's weird that Lupa is so trusting so quickly, or having them be confused that the trial went past so quickly. By drawing our focus to the inconsistency in the story, the writers tell the reader that they're aware of it, and that there's a reason which will likely become clear later on. And in this case, there is a perfect reason. They're all trapped in a sonorosphere, repeating the events over and over. Of course, many things would feel a little out of place, and certain events would be hurried along to keep Cristoforo's plan on track. This would have taken these odd inconsistencies in the pacing and turned them into clever hints at the truth behind the story. I still feel like both of those are very small nitpicks overall. On the whole, the pacing was great, and there were only minor issues like this which kept it from feeling really polished to me. And finally, let's talk about the aftermath. I love the TD fighting thing which took place after the story. It could have been integrated into the world a little better, with NPCs taking part in the cleanup and with some disruption to their usual routines, but this is so close to being the exact kind of thing I've always wished for when it comes to depiction of the consequences of world-shaking events in a gacha quest. It makes sense that there would be monsters roving the streets of Septimont after all that happened, and turning that into an engaging combat event where we sweep our way through the city clearing out ever stronger enemies was a great idea. And when it comes to the quest itself, if we look past those odd questions about how it all actually worked, which left some of us confused, it does leave us with some really good questions to ask. Did Frolova deliberately sabotage Cristoforo's ending by giving Rover the book? Was that the start of her journey to the good side? If yes, why? If no, how was that act to her advantage? And what exactly is she planning? And either way, does Cristoforo know? Will he punish her for her actions? These are the kinds of questions I want to have at the end of any story, ones which look forward to the next part of the story and build anticipation for the future. On balance, I feel like this quest lived up to the standards set in Cartethyia's story. It was far more ambitious and much more complex, and while there were a few rough edges where that complexity didn't quite feel adequately explained, for the most part it makes sense, and overall I'd say it was a success. And more importantly, the moment-to-moment experience was great from start to finish, and Lupa turned out to be a fantastic character. There are still things they could have improved, and I would especially love for them to start widening their focus to more than one character at a time. Of course, the new release is always going to be at the center of the story, but they could shine even more if they were surrounded by the others. The one thing which really feels missing from WuWa for now is that sense of living connection between all the characters we meet. The sparks of friendship between Lupa and Cartethyia are a step in the right direction, but I really hope that they take that further, since that is what would truly bring the world to life. Either way, this story was a ton of fun. I'm even more excited for what comes next. Until next time.